Good morning. I'm glad you can take some time to devote to worship this weekend. This is the weekend of Epiphany, the weekend when we mark the arrival of the wise men. One of the best musical groups I've ever played in was a jazz band in college. It was my sophomore year. The music we played was tough and rewarding and complex, just really meaty, like a lot going on. It was great music. And as I said, I was a sophomore and I was in a band that was mostly juniors and seniors. And so I had a very real sense that I was kind of holding on. Like I was not the strongest player in the band. In fact, I was probably in the bottom couple, right? That and the band director, I think it was a fellow who was he had a fiery temper. And in the end, that temper cost him his job there, which is a story for another day. But I got to see that temper after practice one day. He kind of leaned into me and he told me, "Andy, you gotta get your intonation under control. Gotta start playing in tune." And I had to learn that. He told me I needed to figure it out fast. Now, to have this pointed out in front of people was intensely embarrassing. And frankly, I thought I was playing in tune. I had been playing trombone since fourth grade at that point. So at that point would have been like about a decade of playing. And I'd been playing since the horn was taller than I was. And I'd been taking private lessons that whole time. And so I thought I had a sense of what being in tune meant and sounded like and felt like. And if you're not a musician, the idea of playing in tune is every note has a certain frequency. And so if to play in tune is to hit that exact frequency when you start the note and for the whole length of the note, right? If you start the note on the right pitch, the right frequency, but then it bends down, now you're out of tune. Or if it bends up, or if you don't hit it square and then you get it to where it needs to be, that doesn't work, right? You have to hit the note in tune at the exact right pitch from the second you begin the note for the entire length of the note, or else people can hear. And to trained musicians, they'll go, that's not in tune. For people listening to music who aren't trained, they'll go, that doesn't sound good. Like you can tell. If you don't know what it means to be in tune, your ear does, even if you haven't thought about it or been trained in this yourself. And it sounds like it should be easy, like just play the right note, like put down the right keys on the trumpet, or put down the right pieces on the saxophone. Are they still called keys? I don't know. I'm a trombone player. Put the slide in the right position and you just get the right note. If only it was that easy. The horns play different based on whether they're warm or cool, whether your lip is tired, whether you warmed up, how long you've been playing, whether you're using enough breath support. Like it's a little bit more challenging than it might sound. And so I went to the person I was taking private lessons with, the trombone professor at Truman, and I asked, this guy, jazz professor tells me I have a problem playing it in tune. He says, "Well, Andy, you do, and we've been working on that. We're going to keep on working on that." He was far more gracious about it, and thus began the year of me learning to play in tune. And what I would have to do, like this, I spent a year doing this. I took this tuner, still have it, still works. And when you turn it on, it will tell you what note you're playing, and then these two lights will light up, do, if you're in tune. And I was singing an A, and I was a little bit off, right? So it'll tell you, if those two lights light up, you are in tune. And if one lights up, you're high. If one lights up, you're low. And so I would, every day, go over and I would play, and I would put this on the music stand in front of me. And I would play the same note again and again and again, so that the second I played it, I'd have both those lights, the top and the bottom light, shine. They would tell me I would play the note again and again and again until I could get that note in tune. Not once, not twice, but 20 times in a row. And then I'd have to practice getting to that note. Like, it doesn't matter if you can play the note in tune just play it. If you're coming down to it and you go under it as you go down, you gotta be able to get into it from below. You gotta come up to it, like, and I just practice one note, and then once I could get that one note, B flat, then I'd go to A, and then I'd go to A flat, and then G, and then G flat. Like, that just doing those couple of notes, that was an hour, right? And I spent a year learning what it felt like, what it sounded like, how to take a trombone and play it in tune. It took a while. It was worth it. It took a while. I'm guessing that everyone who would watch this video, and everyone who's going to be in worship tomorrow, has learned things that are hard. It is, at some point in everyone's life, it seems like there's things that we have to learn that are just challenging, that are, and it's unexpected things. I can't even begin to guess what they are. But if you think about what are the hard things, the challenging things, the unusual things that you have learned, that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at the Magi. They learned something that took effort and concentration, that they had to go out of their way and do. Like, I had to go out of my way and make time to go and spend time sitting in a dark practice room with a tuner on a music stand. Like, that wasn't going to happen unless I chose to make it happen. And the same thing with these Magi. They had to choose to do the thing that they did. You see, for them to be able to find Jesus, first they had to read Hebrew. And if you think about, I mean, that's a challenging and hard thing, learning another language. I've learned, well, I was taught Spanish. It didn't sink in at all. And then I learned Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. And like, every time I think to myself, I'm not going to do this to myself again, learning another language. It just takes time and effort and focus, and that's what they did. And they did it without the help of textbooks or having a class, or they just chose to learn Hebrew. And the Magi probably came from one of three places. Persia, which would have been to the east. The earliest Christians believe the wise men came from Persia. They could have come from Babylon, which they would have had copies of the Hebrew, the books of Moses, because the books of Moses were written down while the Jewish people were in exile, and the Babylonians had a strong astrological study bent to them. And so maybe they came from Babylon. Maybe these are Magi, wise men from Babylon. It could have been that they came from the Arabian Peninsula. That's a place that had a lot of trade going through it, so they would have had access to the gifts, gold, frankincense, myrrh, and and they would have encountered Jewish people to maybe get a copy of what the books of Moses and the book of the prophets. Like, so we don't know where they came from, but no matter where they came from, Persia, Babylon, or the Arabian Peninsula, they would have, Hebrew just would not have been the language of their household. Like, they had to choose to learn the language, and they did. And then they chose to read and to study what we call the Old Testament. Like, you read the Old Testament, it takes some doing. You don't just like sit down and say, oh, I'm just going to read through the Old Testament and make sense of it all. Like, it takes some study. Like, the more you read it, the more sense it makes. Like, there is a consistent theological line to it. There's a consistent message, and I will even dare say the more you read it, the more the begats start to make sense, because you think, that's so-and-so who did this. Like, the more you read it, the better it gets. But it does take some reading. And if you think about, like, they had to read the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, there's a lot of cultural knowledge that you got to bring to that. Like, and they didn't have Sunday school or a seminary trained preacher to like tell them about, well, this is how you think about like Egypt and the slave getting out of slavery and the Davidic kings and first century Roman context. Like, they didn't have that. So they had to go through and learn these things. If you think about like how many people watching this video know the history of Mexico. Like, we know American history fairly well, Civil War, World War I, when founding, stuff like that. But you go south or down to Mexico or up to Canada, and like, do most people just kind of know that history? I don't think so. It's not common knowledge, right? To know when was Canada founded? I don't know, right? And I like learning history. I need to go look into this. And it's the same thing. The Magi, they had to choose to learn the history of the Hebrew people of Israel, a kingdom that was not theirs, right? And so these fellows, they did have access to such data, so they were probably nobility of some sort in a court, the king's court of another land. Maybe you could think of them as proto-scientists. They had questions, they sought answers using astrology in the texts, their own texts, and the stories and texts of other people like that. They have questions and they're willing to take the time to try to figure out the answer. So I respect that. And what is it that they saw as they looked into the sky? Like maybe they saw the planetary alignment of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which happened in about this time frame. Maybe they saw Halley's Comet. Halley's Comets were called bearded stars at that point in time. So maybe they saw Halley's Comet, which had went through the sky at about the time of Jesus' birth. Maybe they saw a supernova. We don't know. I mean, we also don't know how many there were. Like, the tradition is that there were 3 because there were 3 gifts. There could have been 7 and 4 of them were bums and didn't bring gifts. We don't know that either. But what we do know is that we look at them, the Magi, is that we're looking at people who can find their way to Jesus, and they figure it out by asking questions and being willing to act on those questions and act on the answers they find. They're willing to take a hike and go and try to find out. And it's not like they knew where they were going to land in Bethlehem. They knew that they needed to get to Israel, and they thought, well, we'll go to the capital first. Like they didn't have it all figured out. They had questions, and they had enough of an answer to get started. And what we see in them, like it's right here at the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. Like at the beginning of this, we see it's a kind of motley crew of people that gather around Jesus initially. We have the first person to say yes to Jesus is Mary. The first disciple is his mother, the first person to say yes. And then the next people are the shepherds, right? And these are the people who are so people didn't trust shepherds. If no one would trust you and no one would give you any other job, you could get a job as a shepherd because you could count how many sheep you sent people out with, and you could count how many sheep they came back with. And if you didn't come back with the same number, you lost your job and you had to pay for your sheep. Like it was the job for the people who no one else trusted. And so you have Mary, and then you have a bunch of shepherds who no one trusts, and then you have a bunch of magi who show up from a foreign land. They're the ones who show up. Like, it's an amazing group of people who are the first people who bow to Jesus. And I think what we see here is these are the phrases that are sort of referenced in this reading out of Matthew 2 that tells the story of the Magi. The way that it's in Genesis 22, the promise made to Abraham that his people will be a blessing to all the nations. Well, people from all the nations have now come gathering before Jesus. And it's in 2 Samuel 5, we see the promise that to David in his line that he will be a shepherd to all of God's people. And that's all of God's people. It's not just the Jewish people, it's all people. And so we see the beginnings of this, what will become true. And it is interesting to note, of course, that Jesus doesn't do anything, right? Jesus is fully human, and what does a fully human 1-year-old do? Kind of walk around, and that's about it. Like that's what they're up to. It's also interesting to note that from the very beginning that even if Jesus isn't choosing to be involved in politics, he's won. Politics is choosing to be involved with him. He is called King of the Jews. That's the title for Herod. And so from the very beginning, like, he is seen as a political threat, as being involved. And this is going to happen again and again with questions about money and taxes and all the things that show up in Jesus' ministry. They do intersect with the government, with politics on a regular basis. So we have this moment, the Magi are showing up, and Mary and Joseph open the door to them, which is a moment of bravery. If someone showed up at your door, not speaking your language, or at least not well, and dressed in ways you've never seen before, and asked, "Can we come in and worship your son, your newborn 1-year-old?" Like, that was a courageous act by Mary and Joseph. But I do think that in the end, it's really the Magi who take the award for being the most brave and courageous people in this moment. They've taken 2 years of their, by the time they get back, they will have taken 2 years of their lives to check on a theory. They didn't know what they would find when they left. Like, they saw a star in the sky, and they had read in the Hebrew scriptures, not their scriptures, but the Hebrew scriptures, that this meant that a king of the Jews had been born, and they set out to the west, assuming that they would be able to find one baby born in an entire kingdom. Like, wow, that is bracing. That is like, we're going to do this, and you think we can do this? Yeah, we can do this. And they went out and they did it, and that's impressive, right? They are not just brave for taking this journey. They're not just brave for being willing to learn in the first place. Like, to learn things, you never know what you're going to learn, right? They have been willing to question and go looking for new ways to understand the world. And they're willing to do that. Like that, to learn and just consciously go out of your way to find out other things. It might question, it might challenge what we already think and what we already believe. Like, that is a courageous act. And we don't know how it impacted them in the long run. The Magi, they go home, and they probably go home together. Like, I assume that they all came from the same area. They knew each other. Like, I don't think that they came from 3 different areas, 3 different kingdoms. They traveled together. Like, that's what I think. But they went home having learned about Jesus. Not everything, but something. But I don't think they then just like stopped and said, "Oh, we figured out everything there is to figure out." No, I think they kept on learning and studying and looking at other cultures, based on an understanding that things that are true, like, God has created all things, and there is a fundamental truth, and they wanted to keep on seeking out what that was. That they need not fear trying to find out more, for in finding out more about other places and times and peoples and cultures, they will understand more about who God is and what God has done. And as I read this seems to me to be the good news of this story. The good news is that continuing to learn, continuing to try new things, continuing to go and seek and explore, it does take courage, and we see in the Magi a model for how to do that. Right? They went to great lengths to learn. And I think we're left this story. Like, Matthew didn't have to tell us this story. Of all the stories of the life of Jesus, like, he made sure to tell us this one. I think it's part of the encouragement that we are meant to follow Jesus. Is not like you lock in and you just follow Jesus, and once you figure out Jesus, then that's it. You're done learning, you're done growing, you're done experiencing. But I don't think we see that. I think the Magi are showing us like something about the importance of continuing to learn, and the lengths that it is worth going to continue to learn, and the trust that as we seek to learn and to grow and to understand other cultures, other people, other times, that we will be growing in our understanding of the beauty and truth and goodness of God, for God is behind it all. It is a question of what more is there to understand, what more can we understand and grow and learn about. And so as we begin this new year, maybe it's worth asking, what will we learn this year? Where will we grow? And it doesn't necessarily have to be about data. Like, I spent a year learning to play in tune, and I'm glad I did it, and it was good, and it helped me be a better musician and play, and it was a good thing to do. It was a challenge, but it was good. But so it's not just learning data, it's about learning experiences and learning skills and building relationships. Like, where are we going to go? And maybe you take a 1-year journey to go experience a new thing. Maybe you take the 1-year journey in place to learn a new thing here. I don't know. But what I do know is that the Magi were courageous enough to act on a question and to go seeking, and that in the end what they found was worth it, because in the end they found Jesus. And I think for us to follow in their footsteps, to learn and to grow and to question, I think in us doing so, we'll find out a little bit more about Jesus as well. Thanks be to God. Amen.